Fred, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being willing to not only be our first person, but to close our final program for 2018. Thank you for that. Fred, we only have an hour, and you have so much to share with us. We can only do a little justice to the years through the Holocaust and the war, much less get into all those other amazing things you've done since the war, but we'll get as far as we can get with it. Fred, you were born in December 1932, just weeks before Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Before you tell us what happened to you and your family under the Nazis and during the Second World War and the Holocaust, tell us a little about your family and their life before Hitler came to power.
My parents married in 1924 when Germany was still a democracy. They had first a daughter, but unfortunately she died after 3 days. Then I had a brother that was born, and he lived until 11 years ago. He passed away in Baltimore. And then finally I had another brother who also passed away. So that we were two to be reared by my parents at first. 6 weeks after I was born, Adolf Hitler was chosen as Chancellor of Germany. At that time, Hitler had a private army called the Stormtroopers, who used to beat up people in the street or killed Jewish men. So my father, who had been, I should say, first a German soldier in World War I, and even got decorated by the,
Here in the pocket.
I have it in my pocket, by the Iron Cross, the highest medal. He was awarded that by the German Marshal Hindenburg, who later on became the president of Germany, and who appointed Hitler to become Chancellor of Germany. Unfortunately, they thought they would be able to control Hitler because in 1932 there had been 3 governments in Germany and it never could last long, so they thought the Nazis had 38% of the parliament but never had a majority, but they decided to pick Hitler and hopefully would control him. Of course, unfortunately, Hindenburg died in 1934, and then Hitler proclaimed himself the Führer.
Fred, before we turn to the events after Hitler came to power, just a couple more questions. First, not only did your father win the Iron Cross, he was severely injured as well.
Yeah, he was wounded in Verdun, in the Battle of Verdun, as a German machine gunner.
And I wanted to also ask you, how large was your extended family?
My father was the youngest of 6 children. My father was born in 1896, but his parents were married in 1881. And actually, my grandfather on a paternal side was born on July 31st, 1855. And at the age of 26, he married my grandmother, my grandmother, Adolf Kahn, born Ross. And I would get to know her later on. Mm-hmm. So that Julius was the oldest, then there was a girl called Fanny, and then after Fanny, the 2 sisters were born close to each other, Rosa and Selma Kahn, and finally an uncle Hermann, and my father, who was born on October 28, 1896.
1893. Fred, you started to talk about what happened after Hitler came to power in early 1933. It wasn't long after that your father made the decision to leave Germany for Belgium. Why did he decide that early in 1933 to leave?
As I alluded to, the stormtroopers, brown shirts, would paddle in the street, and especially after Hitler became chancellor, they would kill Jewish people, men. First, they even opened a concentration camp, Dachau, where at first Hitler put in political opponents, not Jews, but political opponents. But then, on March the 15th, 1933, somehow some of those brown shirts went and threw stones into people's business in a city where I was living, Wiesebvaden. It was out of control, so that the German government under Hitler decided on April 1st there would be a national boycott of Jewish business. And of course, as you know, a month later, on May 10th, they burned the books.
Mm-hmm. And that's when at that time is when your father
And then
decided
in September, I was only 9 months old. Mm-hmm. My father went supposedly on a trip to Belgium as a businessman. And in those days, you had to, and still today, when you leave one place, you have to another place, you have to sign out, especially in Germany. And so my mother later on signed out that he was on a business trip, and of course he never came back. But he thought he would come back after a couple of years. He thought Hitler would not last more than a couple of years.
And Fred, am I right that when he went to Belgium, he thought that Hitler and the brown shirts would leave the women and children alone?
Correct.
Yeah. So
at first, the men, only when men were attacked, and even and women and children were left alone, because the attacks against Jewish men were, as I mentioned, by the brown shirts, not legal at all. Eventually, the brown shirts were eliminated in favor of the German army with a deal, and the Hitler's acolytes went and killed the leaders of the brown shirts.
Fred, once your father went there to Belgium, later your mother and your brother Hans joined your father in Belgium, but left you in the care of your aunt and uncle, Siegfried Nassauer and Rosa Kahn Nassauer, and you would end up being with them for 5 years until the fall of 1938. Tell us what you can about what your life was like living with your aunt and uncle, and what your parents' circumstances were like with Hans in Belgium.
Well, my father had a sister who was childless. She offered to take care of me when I was about a year old until they would return, and hopefully, Hitler would be gone. So I was reared by an aunt and uncle, which I thought were my parents. They were very loving. They hugged me all the time. And while I was with them, about maybe when I was a couple of years old or 3, I became a friend with a German boy, Walter Kaltwasser, and he was not Jewish, and he would later on protect me when other kids, maybe I was 4 or 5 years old then, who would run after me and throw stones after me and call me dirty Jew in German, dreckige Jude. Of course, I didn't know anything about Nazis and all the rest of it, but that has remained in my memory ever since, as young as I was. Then also, I was a little naughty boy sometimes, and I would go up in the attic and try to look through the window of the attic to see how things looked from there. Fortunately, my aunt was right behind me, and grabbed me by my trousers and I got a spank. Another time, they were looking for me all over the place and eventually found me sleeping in a doghouse. So I also went on race flights, and one time I came down the hill in front of our house on a sled and hit my nose, so I was quarantined inside of the house. And I recall when I put my nose against the window, seeing other kids having fun coming down on the ride.
And you were a kid. You were a typical kid during
Yes,
that
yes.
time.
And occasionally my brother would come to visit with his mother. In one time he had a white shirt and trousers, and with Walter, we grabbed him and threw him in the dirty. We got him dirty. But he was 5 years older than we were. But I cannot believe we did that.
Fred, you were one of the things that happened while you were with your aunt and uncle is your paternal grandmother died while you were with her.
Yes. There were two brothers who married two sisters. And they live too far away from each other in that German village. And one of not my aunt and uncle, but the other, which were also my aunt and uncle, they took care of my paternal grandmother, Adolf Kahn, and at noon each day, I don't know when it started, maybe I was about 3 years old, I would go and pick her up at 12 o'clock at noon and walk her from one daughter to another daughter. And unfortunately, as I mentioned to you, one day she fell down up the street. It was in June 1938, and she died.
And you were there for that.
Right, I was walking with her.
Fred, your move to join your parents after 5 years with your aunt and uncle was a sudden move in October of 1938. Tell us what precipitated this sudden move of you to Belgium.
Sure. On September 30th, 1938, there was what we are known the Munich Pact, which gave away part of Czechoslovakia to Hitler. At that time, the Prime Minister of England went back after signing the treaty with the Munich Agreement with Hitler, who promised him peace in our time. And his picture actually was taken then, showing Chamberlain coming back to London, with a piece of paper that said peace in our time. But my father thought there would be war. And indeed he was right, because 11 months later, World War II started in Europe. Another brother of my father had a Christian girlfriend in the city of Aachen, which is a German city with the border of Belgium. So during that day, maybe the day after the Munich Pact, he must have made phone call. His brother probably told him about that girlfriend, and so that they arranged for my uncle Siegfried, that is, to take me to that German lady. Her name was Maria Goer. My uncle, of course, who took me there, never knew her before, but it was arranged that the lady would take me by streetcar to the Belgian border, to the German border first. And then I would walk through the no man's land, the space between both countries, alone. They thought it was a Saturday afternoon, October the 1st, 1938, that people would not notice me walking through the frontier.
A little boy. You were just
A
walking
little
through
boy.
the frontier, yeah.
Except to see, and of course, bear in mind, I just spoke only German. And a lady had told me in German, geh geradeaus, means just walk. I didn't know why I was still doing that. But I walked too slow. I walked very, very slow. So that by the time I got on the other side, I was all by myself looking up with somebody yelling over the fence, "C'est mon fils!" I didn't understand French. And a customer official talked to me in a language I didn't understand. So it turned out to be the person who was yelling across the fence was my biological father, who yelled, "That is my son," in French, "C'est mon fils." That's the first time I saw my father at the age of 6 years old. Imagine that some of you wouldn't have met your parents until you're 6 years old. That's happened to me. So that my father then, had been for 5 years already in Belgium, and he became a champion bridge player. So he made a lot of friends among the Belgians, who considered him a fellow bridge player. And so maybe through their assistance, I was allowed into Belgium as a political refugee, and I wasn't even short of 6 years old.
So you got through, and
So then I was put in kindergarten to learn French, and go ahead.
so you would, and I know we're having to skip over so much, and I am sorry about that. And there you are, reunited with your parents, living with them in Hans, and for almost the next year.
And another grandmother.
And another grandmother. World War II began, as you just noted, with the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. And then, of course, about 8 months later, in May of 1940, the Germans invaded Luxembourg, Belgium, and France. Tell us what you recall about the invasion of Belgium and what happened to your family.
My father had a lot of Belgian friends. One of them was an officer in the Belgian army near the German border, and he called up on Friday, May the 10th, at 5:30 in the morning. He called up my father to say the German just crossed the border. And we had a black Ford, and so we piled up in a car and took off with the aim of going to the Flanders, because the Flanders in World War I had, they fought the whole World War I in the Flanders in Belgium. And he thought it would be a repeat, and we would be safe in the Flanders. Well, it turned out to be now that the Germans used the Blitzkrieg, so that before you know it, and also they had German planes coming, when the French and English army came to the rescue of the Belgian, the German airplanes would come and machine gun civilians. And we had to jump out of the car each time, and several people probably were killed. And the reason they did that is to spread chaos and get the French and the German, English army, sort of hindered by. That's it.
When you were trying to get to Flanders, if I remember correctly, your father was hoping to get to England. That was his hope.
After. Eventually, before the car broke down, an English soldier asked for a lift, hitchhike, and he was on a running board, and I remember he was singing, "It's a long way to Tipperary." And then also...
And he sang another song.
Yeah, another song. He said, "I'll hang our dirty linen on the Siegfried line." Siegfried line were bunkers in Germany, like World War I. They thought and the French had Maginot lines. That's a reference to that.
And so this British soldier hitched a ride with you. Eventually, he got off. Your car broke down.
Yes, and then later on, my father was talking to his mother-in-law in German, she knew only German, and some people turned him in and said he was a spy. And the British guys, fortunately my father knew English, and he yelled out, and so he was saved by the British.
And your Uncle Herman, who you mentioned a while ago, he got arrested.
Yes.
Yes.
While we were on the way to the Flanders, my Uncle Herman was arrested. He had only one daughter. My father had two children and a mother-in-law, and he got himself not arrested by the Belgians, But my uncle was sent then to southern France. He made a mistake of coming back after the Belgium had capitulated to Brussels, where he was arrested by the Germans for coming back. And he was put in a prison for 18 months.
Fred, you eventually, before long, you had to return. You returned to Brussels. You came back to Brussels.
Yeah, when the German, just before what I just mentioned, after my father left, hopefully to go to England, but he was there too late, at Boulogne-sur-Mer, which was near Dunkirk. They made a movie about Dunkirk recently, where 300,000 Englishmen escaped to England from not falling into the hands of the German. My mother then was on her own, and we were going to go. We saw the German soldiers coming down. The French were going away on the other side, and we were going to go into a building, but a German lieutenant told my mother, who pretended to be a Volksdeutscher, that is, descended of Germans, and he told her, don't go into that building, go next door, because that building is not solid. Throughout the night, I heard like thunder, they were exchanging of gunfire of both armies, and in the morning when we got up, the house next door was destroyed. So we walk up the hill, and I don't know how we would have got back into where we had come from, when suddenly a German bus stopped with the Red Cross and gave us a lift all the way to Brussels, where the German Red Cross treated us nicely to hot cocoa. Before that, before the bus came along, I saw on the left-hand side a German soldier sleeping. He probably was dead.
Fred, when you returned to Brussels, you're now under German occupation.
Right.
And you went to school under German occupation.
Right. Then we went back to Verviers, not from Brussels. My mother had a friend in Brussels. That's why I mentioned Brussels. But in Verviers, which is a city near Spa, Belgium, and in the province of Liège, the Walloon, it's a Walloon French-speaking part. Whereas in the northern part of Belgium, they speak Flemish. And so I was put in a kindergarten to learn French. Then in first grade, I was last of the class. When eventually I was forced to register as a Jew and also turn in our radios. For some odd reason, the Germans want to have people's radios from the Jews. I had to go down. I was only 9 years old. And so I got scarlet fever, which delayed my wearing the yellow star. But when I went back to school in the third grade, the kids called me sheriff, and pretended they were cowboys in England playing around with them. But there's one boy called me sale juif, dirty Jew. I took my right fist and broke his sunglasses. I mean, his glass, not sun, but his glasses. It turns out then it got us to the principal. Normally you don't want to get to the principal. But then the principal said, repay the glasses, apologize, but he mentioned that he is willing to help us out and go in the underground because these people are going to denounce you to the Germans as a Jewish family. By that time, the Jews were already deported to Auschwitz. In fact, 25,000 Jews from Belgium were murdered and gassed in Auschwitz. During the time, then we also heard on an English radio that the Jews were being killed in Russia. This was June 1942, and we received also a postcard of my aunt who had reared me in Germany that she said they were going to be resettled the next day to the east. And of course, it was clear to us that I would never see her again. And she mentioned something like that to that effect. And so that the bridge players told my father, they have people working for them at the city hall, and that's how my father got a forced identity paper in the name of Lejeune, which is a common name in Verviers. And so my father became Maurice Lejeune, my mother probably Thelma Lejeune, and I became Freddie Lejeune. I dropped out of school. The principal then arranged for me to leave the school. He would then, during the 2 years of while we were in the underground, that means making sure that nobody would know our whereabouts, and we conceal our names so that nobody, the danger was that somebody would suspect that we were Jewish and then would denounce us to the Germans. That's the reason why we moved every 2-3 months.
Freddie,
Go ahead.
you first assumed the identities as the Lejeune family in 1942, and as you said, you lived under that identity for 2 years. Your father was arrested at some point.
In 1941, before we went into the underground, my father was arrested because his name was Max Kahn, and it turned out to be that they interrogated him in the basement of the Kommandantur, which was the German secret police headquarters, and they were looking for Max Kahn, who was a communist. When my father pursued him, they got the wrong Max Kahn, that he was decorated with the Iron Cross by the German army, and then they realized they made a mistake, and then let him go. This was before we went in the underground.
One of them, as you mentioned a couple of moments ago, you received this postcard from your aunt and uncle,
Correct.
Which they sent
On June the 9th.
on June the 9th. Especially poignant comment you made to me is that you no longer have that postcard. And
Yeah, unfortunately, my mother, my late mother, was very upset because when we went in the underground under the name of Lejeune, we disregarded everything that was in our name. And as a result, my mother tore up that card, which she regrets she did.
Yeah.
But I also should mention that most of our belongings, while we were in hiding, were put into the basement of friends of my parents. And of course, after the war was over, we got all that back.
Freddie, Fred, tell us, while you were in hiding as a Lejeunes, at one point there was a German commander living, I believe, right next door to you.
Right. Before we went in the underground, there was a German commander of the city where we lived who lived in the apartment next door to us. So the landlady asked him to talk to my father. And he obviously was not a Nazi because he told my father, as long as I'm here, nothing is going to happen to your family. But if I will leave, I don't guarantee what could happen to you, so you make your own arrangement between four eyes. You make your arrangements. Mm-hmm. And later on, after the war, we found out he was a lawyer in Düsseldorf, and he was, of course, not a Nazi. But this was before probably at the beginning of the deportation of Jews from Belgium.
When you referred to your hiding as you were self-hiding.
Right.
What did you mean by that?
By self-hiding, we went on our own. Fortunately, my parents were, especially on the side of my grandmother, were pretty well off. They had a big business in Germany, and then unfortunately, my father, the father-in-law of my father, he died, and so eventually we had a lot of money. And again, through the bridge players, one of the bridge players was a director of a bank, and my father entrusted him with his money. That helped us during the World War II, during the underground years, to buy things in the black market, because we were not registered in the various places where we lived, and therefore we had no ration cards, and I had to buy everything in the black market. Mm-hmm. And every time we moved from one place to another, a friend of my father, who was a farmer, would come with his horse and move us from one place to another, Mr. Cluten. And he did that. After the war, we asked him, why did you risk your own life? And he said, well, that was the way you had to do it, as a human being.
You mentioned the farmer. How many people knew your true identities?
The farmer and the principal.
The principal and the farmer, they were the only ones.
Right, that's the only one that I know of.
You described to
And the bank man
And the banker.
they went through other people.
went through other
Right.
people for that. So just
Yeah, right, but they did not know where we lived.
Fred, you described that time, those 2 years of being under the false identity, the Lejeunes. You described that as a lonely time for you.
Oh, yes, of course. If we would be between the age of 10 to 12, I had no contact with young people my age. It was very lonely, and of course I had to invent my own games. I threw a ball up in the air pretending I was a goalkeeper, a soccer player. And then of course we had one thing I didn't mention to you, is that we had a game of backgammon. And we played backgammon all the time. So that for 2 years, the whole family played backgammon. And that was our only entertainment. We did not listen, we had no radio. And toward the end, in the last place where we stayed, in Teux, on the Teux, we used to go at night to a landlady to listen to the English radio. And after the liberation, my father asked that lady whether they suspected that we were Jewish. And she answered, no. They thought my father was an English spy, since he was always listening to the radio, English radio. So these were we hid in farming villages, where people really were not interested in politics and couldn't care less. Many of them were against, of course, the Germans, but you didn't see many Germans. But my responsibility was to be with my grandmother at all times. Because she spoke only German, and as my wife said, people would not pay attention to an old lady with a young boy. And so one day we went in a local train, and unbeknownst, never expect any German to come in the compartment of the train, but suddenly there's some German officers come in it. And my grandmother was sitting next to me, she panicked, and she had a newspaper in her purse. In those days, they didn't have pictures in the newspaper, and she went like that to hide herself behind a newspaper. And then afterwards, when we got off the train, I told her, you know what? You read the newspaper upside down. Because then when I came back and told this to my parents, that was, the humor, in spite of the tragedy, kept us alive.
Fred, you moved to your final hiding place was in that village of
Teux.
And that was the fall of 1944.
Correct.
And Belgium was liberated by the Allies in the fall of 1944. But of course, the war continued into May of 1945. When did you believe you were free to come out of hiding, and then what happened?
Well, of course, when we were the day we were liberated on September 9th, 1944, the battle went on all day long in the region where we lived. We lived on a hill in a village of Lejeune. Below that, there was a city of Teux, and then there was a slope on the other side. And suddenly, towards 7 o'clock at night, we saw the battle, the noise of the battle ceased, and we saw what we knew were tanks with an orange thing on top, and my father just took off, even went over a bridge that had blown up and greeted the first Americans of the First Army. And then while I was doing that, other Belgians of the city went to the supply depot of the Germans, stealing all the food there, and including Dutch cigars.
And
Then eventually we went there too, and the next day when American trucks came by, I gave them the Dutch cigars, and in turn they threw me chewing gum. And then when I returned to the city where I went to school, they thought, my classmates thought I had been killed, and I gave them the chewing gums.
Fred, you described that day of just constant fierce fighting all day, and when it ended, and as you described, your father ran to the American tanks. Your father always said that was the greatest day of his life.
Yeah, correct. In fact, one day I told my wife that what he would answer, and I asked him in front of her, and I used my wife as to witness what happened to me, so that because some of the things were very unbelievable. But I told her September 9th, 1944, I asked him, and sure enough, he answered that.
The greatest day of his life. Yes.
Right. And another time, much later on, when my father passed away, but we were in Rehoboth Beach here on a vacation with my mother, I brought up the subject, and this was for her benefits, that I had been arrested during World War I, World War II, of course, by the Belgian police for being a truant, not being in school. It was a mistake of me, going away from where we lived, and so they grabbed me, took me to the police station, interrogated me, and I pretended to be who I had been trained before we went in the underground as Lejeune, and that I was a Catholic boy, and I also learned to study the Catholic prayers, like Hail Mary, and the daughter of a landlady taught me that, all those Catholic prayers. So I pretended to be Freddie Lejeune, and I said, well, I had scarlet fever. I did not want to hurt the other kids. So anyhow, they left me alone in that room, and I tell you, I thought Germans would come. But fortunately, they came back and asked me, is your mother blonde? And of course, then I knew they were all right. I said, of course. And so they told me, you leave, and you don't ever come back. And so 6 years later, I met him again, and I told him, you better hear the police, don't forget. You want to stay away from the police. And so I told him to tell my mother how we met previously, And they, in the meantime, one of the two became chief of police, and he praised my courage for having put on, but they knew all along that I was Jewish, of course.
Fred, at that time in the fall of 1944, you, your family, and others thought the war was over for you. In fact, you said that everything was beautiful, but that turned out not to be the case.
Well, the Germans had a counter-offensive called the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was, for American or English intelligence, was a breakdown. This was a surprise. In this 3 months after we had been liberated, on December 16th, 1944, the Germans came back, and at that time, a lot of the American troops were green troops who had just arrived, and over a 2 weeks period, 100,000 Americans were casualties, of them 10,000 deaths, all within 2 weeks. And most of them were buried down there in Belgium in the Henri Chapelle cemetery.
And you told me, Fred, that your family hit the road again. Those were your
yes,
words.
that was very dangerous because we had resumed our real name. So we walked in the snow and with a lot of other refugees toward Liège, where we had friends, and we stayed there in the basement. At the same time, not only did there was American planes could not go in the air because it was all cloudy. And in Bastogne nearby, the Americans refused to surrender, and the colonel there said, in answer to the demand of the Germans to surrender, answered, nuts, nuts. And when the German commander supposedly got that thing, nuts, he said, Nüssel, what is that? And so now every year in the city of Bastogne, they have a nuts festival. And General McAuliffe, is in the history books for that, for the nuts. But the thing is, it was awfully, and unfortunately also they not only killed, when the German soldiers came back, they also killed not only Americans, but also Belgian civilians. Not Jews, but Belgian civilians, maybe some Jews too. And for example, even when the Belgians hid in a basement, there are reports they were taken out and murdered. And also at that time, they murdered American soldiers in a city who surrendered in a city outside in Malmedy, and eventually the Germans were put on trial for the murder of the American soldiers. This was during the Battle of the Bulge, including also the first time that black soldiers volunteered to fight, and many got caught, tortured, and killed. Black soldiers.
U.S. soldiers.
Yeah, U.S. soldiers.
Fred, your parents, however, they had some rough moments when they were heard speaking German. Can you say a little bit about that? They were overheard speaking their native language to each other. You described to me a couple of incidents.
Well, no, this was in 1940, when they grabbed my father and thought he was a spy because he was talking to his mother-in-law in German. But with my grandmother, of course, I did not talk to her in German. I didn't talk to her when I was outside. Yes, she pretended she was, dumb. Deaf and dumb. But not only when we were out of sight of somebody, I would talk to her in German all the time. And she was quite a lady, and she almost gave me a hard time, but I learned a lot from her. I was told that she was a very strong businesswoman. They compared her to Golda Meir, for example, and she was tough. She always said, "You are the bad one." She said, "If you don't tell the truth, you lie, you go to jail." And so as a result, she's responsible for my developing the proper character and also integrity. And I, of course, had extraordinary parents, both sides, those who reared me as my aunt and uncle, and also my actual parents.
Fred, when did you and your family, when did you really truly feel it was over and you were safe?
Well, when the war was over. I walked up this hill and I hear all the bells in the church in Verviers, and I knew that the war was over. And then I went back to school, and
you would stay in Belgium for, what, 7 more years?
Oh, no, more than that.
More than that, yeah.
I finished during the war. The principal would bring me books in French. I studied French, which I did not know before. And as a result, when I took the citywide exam, I finished number 1 of the entire city in the 6th grade in French. And also I was tutored for Mass afterwards. And then my parents gave me total freedom to do whatever I want. And I created a soccer club of 18 and under that became champion of Belgium. And I still have the cup, and a picture of that is in a book that is available to be bought outside after I'm finished.
What prompted you then to eventually decide that you're going to come to the United States?
Well, I had as I mentioned, there were 2 brothers who married 2 sisters. And one of the the people who reared me were murdered afterwards. But the others, they left, The reason they left through the United States is because one day somebody threw stones at the house. According to the granddaughter, they decided to come to the United States. They even wanted to take me along, but my mother in Belgium, which I did not know about that, it's only that later on I learned about it, wouldn't let me go. That's the reason I stayed behind in Germany. But they went to New York. And so that throughout, actually, while we were in hiding, I knew even their address, 2163 Morris Avenue in the Bronx. And then when the Americans liberated us, I would go to the American soldier, do you know, Nassau and 2163 Morris Avenue. So eventually he wrote to me and invited me. He would pay the fare to come to the United States, but my parents did not want me to let me go until I finished schooling at the high school in Belgium. And so I came to the United States at the age of 19. In Belgium, I learned English as a first foreign language starting in the 7th grade, then Dutch for 4 years, so that when I arrived in the United States, I knew 4 languages. The reason I'm citing that when eventually I went in the Army, the knowledge of language, and then working for the State Department, that got me a job there. That's the only time actually the language was useful, but it helped.
Well,
okay, go
Fred,
ahead.
I think there's so much more that we could hear about the events leading up to this point in Fred's life, much less all that happened afterwards. But I think we have time for just a few questions from our audience.
Right.
Are you game for that?
Yeah.
All right. We have microphones, one in each aisle, and we're going to ask that you wait till you have the microphone. If you have a question, try to make it as brief as you can. I'll repeat it just to be sure that we hear it, and then Fred will respond to your question. So, anybody have a question? And this is a chance to ask it. We got a gentleman right here in green, right here. Here comes a mic from your right. Yeah.
What happened to your uncle and aunt in Germany?
Yeah.
What happened to your aunt and uncle?
They were deported. Very good question. On June the 9th, as I mentioned, we get the dated June 9th, the postcard of my aunt, and there was no doubt about it that she would never see him again. Then I learned later on, maybe 25 years ago, that through German newspaper, the German Wiesebvaden, Tagblatt made a research about the people from Wiesbaden, who were 1,200 of them from Wiesbaden and Frankfurt that were deported to Sobibor, that killing center, and when they were 1,200, and they were gassed on arrival. And also mentioned the train, D18, and I made a copy of that in 3 pages of it, which I distribute or I show when I volunteer on Monday afternoons to visitors. Recently, I researched further, and I went to the central database of Shoah victims' names, and here is the result. You can read it.
And it just shows your aunt and uncle's names are here, and it says place of residence, where they got the information, and fate, and it just murdered.
And this comes from the Jewish Museum in Israel, but the information, of course, was given to them from the German Federal Republic. And the Germans, even the Nazis, kept very careful records on everybody. Even those that were sent to Auschwitz and got the numbers on it, still knew their name. When they were deported, they kept the records, and that's how, out of all that, we know, or at least this Jewish Yad Vashem in museum knows the names of 4 million out of 6 million victims as a result of the Nazi records.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you for sharing that. I think do we have another question? Oh, we do. Okay, good.
You told us your father's best day of his life. Please share with us the best day of your life.
Say that one more time.
The day you would consider the best day of your life.
Great question. You shared with us the day your father thought was the greatest day of his life. What was the greatest day of your life?
The greatest day of my life was when I married my wife. And I should add that she was an exchange student from Taiwan in China. And when I looked at her passport, she arrived in the United States on my birthday, December 19th, 1957, and I married her 6 years later on my birthday. And we will be married 55 years this coming December 19th.
We're going to close our program in a minute, and I'm going to turn back to Fred to close our program, and he also has something else he wants to share with us as well, and we'll do that in just a moment. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, closing out our 2018 program. We'll resume First Person in March 2019. The museum's website will have information about our program next year, but also the YouTube page has all of our programs. It'll have Fred's program and all of our programs, so you can see all of them. So we hope, ideally, you'll come back here for a First Person program, but certainly we hope you can take advantage of what's on the museum's website. When Fred is done, two things are going to happen. Our photographer, Joel, is going to come up on the stage and take a photo of Fred with you as the background. It makes a very nice memento for Fred of this event. And then Fred is going to leave the stage. He's going to go up to the entrance, and he's going to sign copies of his book. And that's another opportunity for folks to talk to him as well. It's our tradition at First Person that our first person has the last word. And so I'm going to turn to Fred for not only our last word for the First Person program today, but for our season.
Thanks God, I'm alive today because good people stood up to evil. To me, they personify the strength, the righteous strength of the human spirit. Personally, I have lived an authentic, honest life for myself and others. But I should say something that when I came to the United States, I was shocked to find out that there was discrimination against people because of their skin color. It was having survived the Holocaust and being persecuted because of my religion. It was abhorrent to me to see people discriminate against others because the fact that they look different. So it seems to me, when I think back now at the age of 85, that I probably resolved never to look down on people because they look different from me or are from different places. So as a result of it, I made a lot of friends all over the world of all walks of life as a result of it. And finally, I got involved while I was teaching at Howard University, of course, on world history. I was involved in civil rights. Among others, 55 years ago, on August 24, end of this month, in 1963, then I was not married yet, but she was there with me, a few steps away, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made his historical speech on I Have a Dream, right here at the Lincoln Memorial. Then I would say, I would be remiss not to mention why I still have hope in the human race. When my uncle turned me over to the Lady Maria Gore in Aachen, he was obviously very emotionally struck and had a feeling I would never see me again if something would happen to him. And so he gave to her the most precious things in his pocket, to her, and asked her to preserve it and give it to me if something would happen to me. And indeed, a couple of years after the war is over, I received a package with a letter explaining what was in the package. It was a gold watch that my uncle gave to her to preserve. No one knew that she had it. She kept it through the war. I never knew her except when I was given to her. My uncle never knew her. And it just happened to be that she was a girlfriend of this other uncle who unfortunately was eventually deported to Auschwitz and murdered on arrival. His witness to his being gassed was described in a book that I bought here. But here it is, and believe it or not, it was given 90 years ago, and when you push on it, you push on it.
Okay.
We'll do the same.
Okay.
You handle it.
Okay.
I do it, but you got the microphone. And it still works.
Push on right here.
Right. Well, you pushed it on the wrong button.
Oh. That wouldn't be the first time.